Wow, what an incredible journey. And here to talk more about it, please welcome Tim Campbell and David Rogers. Gentlemen, welcome. How's it going?
Hello, how are you?
I am doing very well. How are you?
Doing killer,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, obviously now, as you can see, everyone, real quick, we're practicing social distancing today with our interviews on Microsoft Teams. So thanks again for being a part of that. And we're going to be doing it a little bit differently, but it's live, you know? I heard some comments
I was
yesterday.
built for this.
You're built for it. Perfect. I'm super excited. Now, let's kick things off. Actually, before we even get started into the questioning, tell us about who you are and what you do at inXile.
So I'll start off. My name is Tim Campbell. I'm the game director on Wasteland 3, and I just help wrangle the project, everything about it, the moving pieces, to make sure that it's on track and it's turning out to be as great of a game as possible. And a lot of times that involves just working with the different development team members, making sure they have what they need, making sure that there's nothing blocking them or obstacles in their way, and just making sure that everything is running smoothly.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm David Rogers. I'm the lead designer. I work with our lead systems designer and our lead content designer and our writers to really make sure every element of the game comes together in something that is fun, and the kind of in charge of the game actually being fun. And so I'm one of the few people on the team that does what most people think game developers do, which is just play the game a ton and then complain. And so I'm in that really enviable position.
That's awesome. Two very important roles on the team. And it's funny because you mentioned it just there. People think that all you do at game teams is just play games, which is somewhat true, I guess. And I love the fun factor, making sure that's in there. So we're going to get into all of that because I thought, again, that piece was super awesome. But I want to start off with the storytelling. What do you all think about your development story that we kind of just saw in Save Game? Tell us a bit about that.
I thought it was fantastic. I love that you guys put it front and center on iteration. That is at the core of everything we do at inXile. With games that are as big and interconnected and sprawling as we make them, we have to be playing them constantly, and we have to be iterating as fast as humanly possible. And Brian touched on it in the video. Iteration is everything. If you look at the game quality, what players actually play and what they experience, everything that they're going to come away and love is from iteration. It's due to us being able to play and test and refine and just home in on the fun as quickly and as consistently as we can.
Yeah, and so David, I would love to dial in on that a bit as far as the iterative process. What is it about it that appeals to you so much? Like when you are iterating on a thing, what are some of the things that you're looking for?
Well, I don't know that it appeals to us as much as it's the only way to arrive at something that is truly fun and polished. And I think that's doubly true for big sprawling RPGs like ours, where as opposed to making Street Fighter, for instance, which is a beautiful game, that's a purely systems-driven game. You don't have to worry about, oh crap, how much money is the player earning each time they beat Vega, and then what kind of gear are they buying, and how does that influence their power, and then what's the power curve across all the fights? There's a whole other side of this that means that I can't. It's impossible to test a level in isolation. We can't just hop into a level, load a default party, and then play, because if somebody changed the cash reward of a previous quest, that changes what gear I have, that changes my power level. Everything is so wildly interconnected that I would love to hear a better way to go about it, but the only way to really make this game fun is to just play it over and over and over again, and play it from the start. Play 20 hours, make a big list of changes, fix them, and then start over from the beginning, and then play 25 hours, and then start over, and then play 30 hours. And you're kind of crawling through this game, just trying to make everything as balanced. And, the game is, people say 50 or 60 hours. God, I hope it's that low.
Yeah. Well,
it certainly feels huge.
I'm wondering, though, so this is an interesting question maybe for both of you, but especially for David. With that, iterative process, and you're playing the game over and over again, how do you prevent yourself from how do you have a fresh perspective? How do you know that you're not getting into a spot where maybe your opinion is fogging up the development?
That's a really good question.
I don't know if there's a good solution other than it's just kind of something that you learn. It's you kind of can force selective amnesia on yourself, or it's you kind of understand the tiers of strategy. I use Witcher is a really good example that I think everyone it's really popular, so it's a good example to go off of as opposed to referencing Wasteland 3. In The Witcher, for instance, there is the standard combat system, but then there's the crafting and magical potions element. And that's required to play that at a higher level difficulty. So you can kind of understand like, okay, I'm starting to use ability combos right now, and I know on normal mode for a standard player they probably wouldn't be using that, so I have to pull back. And so like by kind of diagramming the complexity of your game and understanding like the tiers of strategy that someone might engage in, you can kind of purposefully shut those off in your brain, or like actively say like, I'm not going to use this strategy tier or during this playthrough because I'm trying to test it for this user set. But you have to have a really deep knowledge of your game and your systems to kind of know how to diagram that, how to break that down, and kind of what strategies you have to extract from your own play style in order to simulate that kind of player.
Yeah,
this is a trap that it's very easy for us to fall into as developers, because we're working so long on one feature or one level or one fight that we can just kind of get numb to it, right? And we can maybe make it work as we expect it to, with all of the context that we have in our minds that players might not have. And then if we just put that in front of players, they wouldn't necessarily understand it, or they might have friction and get hung up or confused by things. And so we have lots of different steps that we take to try to fight against that. We have regular playtests where we kind of have some people, including Brian, head of the studio, step back and just play through the game like a player, right? And just make funky parties and make funky choices and just test out the game for fun, right? As opposed to testing it for raw functionality. And we also do things where our level designers or other people on the team might do peer reviews, where a designer who's spent a lot of time working on one level may swap that level to another designer, and then they kind of can look at each other's and provide fresh eyes and fresh insight. And so this is the sort of thing that every single day we're trying to fight against, so we don't just get numb to, the things that we're trying to polish out of the game.
Yeah, super important thing. And again, this whole show is about creating an optimization for developers. And so I think that knowledge is great to share. So Tim, from you as game director, how do you, outside of the iteration process, how do you really optimize the game development? Because you have things like dates that you may have to hit, you have features that you have to get for review. How do you really go about making sure that everything's moving along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is the iteration, but there are different things which feed into the iterative cycle, right? Sometimes we get data, sometimes we get information from whether it's support departments, QA, or backers playing an alpha or whatever. And those comments and those bugs and all of that feedback kind of funnels back into the development team. And then we kind of sift through it all and assess what things are actionable, what things are not. And then we'll prioritize things and then move them into the development queue for the team to work on. And so on one hand, we're working against our own instincts and our own plan internally and iterating against that. But then we have this funnel of just additional information that's coming through. It might be from people, elsewhere in the dev team who aren't on our project, but are playing the game with clear eyes, or it might be coming in from data from backers or elsewhere. But it all comes in and directly affects how we build the game.
Okay.
There's a couple of really good sources of that feedback that we've been utilizing. So one is like at this time in particular, we recently just released our beta. And then a little while back, we released an alpha build. It went to Gamescom. It went to our backers. And so whenever those things go out, like we're glued to Mixer. We're glued to YouTube. We are watching streamers just play through. And I love how streamers play because they're trying to entertain the audience. But to do that, they are just like taking their inner monologue and they're just blurting it out. And so every little annoyance,
totally.
Oh, that sucked. I can't believe that. I had a 95% hit chance. Why did that not work? Or like every little thing that bugs them, they blurt out really loudly, and then furthermore, what's been really useful for super detailed, super actionable feedback has been the Microsoft Usability Lab. We took our gamepad. For instance, we did a first pass iteration on gamepad. Okay, we think this is pretty good. We know there's some jank in there, but like the general ideas are there. And then they throw it to, sometimes they throw it to 6 experts, or they'll throw it to a couple, or they'll bring in like layman's from off the street who just, they just signed up because they like video games. And I can watch them as they're pressing button inputs on the gamepad, and I can see those lights up. Like if they're having an issue with like, oh, they can't access this menu, I can actually see what they're pressing. And they have like PhD research experts there really parsing out like not just like what are they doing, but like how do I ask questions to them in a way that won't guide them or prime them so we can really get like the purest form of their experience out. And those end up being super, super actionable. I love working with the Usability Lab.
Yeah, that's been super helpful for development. I mean, it's been invaluable. Of course, the developer in us like always cringes when we see a streamer hitting a bug or we have to put something that's maybe still partially raw in front of the usability lab. But every time we do this, we just get real world feedback coming in from players that is super invaluable because they're coming at this from a different perspective. And we really want our game to be playable by a wide range of players, not just people who are hardcore or people who are tuned into the franchise previously. And we really want to open this up. And so being able to get those fresh perspectives really influences a lot of what we do.
Yeah, and so
there's a lot of ego management that goes on. It's so tempting to go, it's not ready. It's not ready. I'm positive we could just ace this test. If you just gave me like 6 more weeks, they won't have any feedback. It'll be awesome. But who knows if your feedback, the stuff you would do, is even in the right direction. So it's like you have to be like, I'm going to put something crappy out there. It's bad. I know it. And that's the point. And you have to embrace that.
Yeah, and so I think I always like to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, actually, let me ask you, do you think that game development is more difficult or is it easier now because of that constant one-to-one feedback? Prior to this, you kind of had to put a game out and you had to see what people thought. Now, to your point of having streamers, you get their instantaneous reaction, and you don't know if it's like super based in what's actually true or if it's just, as you said, a reaction. So how do you see the development process in that sense?
Would you rather get poked with a nail every day or have someone break your arm like at the end of the year?
Yeah.
It's like getting that constant feedback is like they're poking me but I can kind of react to that feedback on the fly and hopefully avoid like in the olden days, you put it out. It was a Hail Mary that you threw and then the reviews would hit on launch day and you were like, oh man, we made something bad or good. And I didn't really have a good gauge on that up until now. And now you get like a lot more pings back from the audience, especially because we were a Fig-backed game. So we have people who are really passionate, who are constantly kind of keeping us in check. Hey, are these features in? It's not running on my computer or whatever. And so that's kind of the olden days you just delayed that pain, and sometimes it was a lot worse. And now I think with the feedback, your ego gets hit a lot more often. But then it's actionable, and you can actually like avoid a much worse fate.
Yeah, I think the answer is both. Honestly, it makes our lives easier in some ways and harder in others. We just released the beta, like Dave was saying, and immediately we saw some streamers hit some things that we're just kind of cringing about, right? But getting that feedback absolutely helps, and I think is critical in today's day and age. Getting fast feedback and wide perspective on your game is hugely helpful to shipping a quality product. I think the flip side, though, personally as developers, it's a bit of like walking the gangplank a little bit in that we're putting something out in front of people that's not the shipping version of the game. It's still raw. There's still bugs. There's still rough edges. And you have to have thick skin going into it because that there are flaws still and kinks that are getting worked out. So I think we need to kind of gut check ourselves a little bit more as developers and get comfortable with that. But the end result is better for the game and better for players.
Yeah, and I imagine communication is part of that, right? Like really setting the expectations, especially in that beta phase, I should say. So what are other sort of tools that you would, or maybe suggestions you would give to small studios that could help them as they get started in the development process?
I'll take the first stab at this.
Go for it.
So something that's and this happens right at the start of your project, and it's something that's really easy to do. If you take a game designer and you lock him in a closet for a year or something, and just give him like a word processor, he or she is going to attempt to think of every edge case and solve every problem ahead of time, and then it's really kind of, we've fallen into this trap in the past. So I'm speaking from experience. I've done this in the past. That you kind of over-design right at the start of the process. Maybe it's because you don't have enough engineers online or whatever the ramp-up process is. And then you have this grand design that's ahead of you, and then you kind of get married to it, and then you insist that like, hey, none of your feedback is valid until all of my concerns and all of my edge cases and all of my systems have gone in. It's very easy to fall into that trap because you feel like you thought through everything, when really the best way to go about it is like, what is like, and people say this all the time, but it's hard to stick to. What is minimum viable product? What are the core pillars of our game? Like in Wasteland, I need to be able to talk to people, make decisions, and shoot. And you could do that in a single level. And until those elements feel good, it's like, why are you adding a crafting system? Why are you adding a customization system? Why are you doing all of this stuff until your pillars have really been solidified? And then also get a minimum element in, because the path to fun might look a lot different once you're in it then you could build a basic shooter, but there's a really wide gap between PUBG and Fortnite from like a game systems perspective, from a feel perspective. How do the guns operate? How does loot drops operate? All that stuff. And those two games feel wildly different despite being in the same genre. But you might not, like, you might implement phase one of like, this is what I think a good feeling gun would feel like, and then that kind of informs a lot of other decisions as these knock-on effects. How the gun feels informs how healing feels, informs how your classes are set up, all of that. So it's really, do not over-design early on. Just get the bare minimum and then start playing it, and then start making those smaller decisions along the way to creep towards something that is fun, and make sure each iterative step that you're taking kind of makes the game progressively more fun.
Yeah, I completely agree. These games tend to expand over the course of development as systems get fleshed out, as developers add in these neat ideas that come up along the way. I mean, it's dough that rises, right? So my advice is, even if you are trying to build a big RPG kind of like this, start small. Start smaller than you think you need. Expose as much of your game systems to designers so that they can iterate and tune and try out crazy ideas without taking other departments down every time they want to see if something's fun or not. And just get the game playable as early as possible, playable internally by your dev team so that you can have those iterative cycles, and playable externally so that you can get those perspectives. I mean, ultimately, one of the things that we've seen true over and over again is that 90% of the polish comes in the last 10% of dev time, because you spend much of your dev cycle just getting the game to function, getting it to work, getting it to hang together, get all the pieces there, that it doesn't leave a lot of time to polish. So anything you can do to kind of stretch that last 10% of the dev cycle, either by pulling in iteration earlier or by trying to stretch things out further, that is directly going to impact the quality of your game. And I think that comes back to iteration, getting the game playable early, and keeping your focus tight.
Cool. These are some great tips. If I were a developer, these are the tips that I want to know. So let's go deeper into the Wasteland 3. Obviously, strategy game. Let's go very specific to this. In the save game doc that we just kind of saw, you all talked about some of the fundamentals that you're trying to implement as far as a strategy game goes. One example was, focus on the actual player's turn, because if you focus on what the enemy's doing, that can suck them out of the experience. What kind of tips would you give for someone building a game that's similar to yours?
I think it's easy to get bogged down in the minutia of like the mathematics of the game. You know what I mean? Exactly how our actions spend, how much does everything cost, but you really need to focus. Like going from Wasteland 2 to Wasteland 3, for instance, was a real exercise in figuring out what were the fun and impactful decisions that the players were making, and what were these superfluous decisions the players were making. For instance, do we require the player manually reload their weapons at the end of the turn? No, it's kind of a rote action that we can just automate, because it's not a meaningful, RPGs are about decisions, but you can kind of take it at face value and just give people total control. But then you end up with, and not to bash it, it's cool for what it is, but like Arma, like just legit Arma, has like 110 little commands. I can control every little aspect of my character. But are all of those actions really super impactful? And then so for our game specifically, like, we want to automate everything that's not a real decision that's going to impact the world or impact like the course of your character. So like another good example is like when a character goes down in combat, we're just going to automatically revive them at the end of combat, because at the end of combat, there's no time pressure. So you're just going to walk over and revive them anyways. So can we just save you that effort so that you can really be focusing on decisions that matter? And I think a side effect of that is it makes it feel like all your decisions matter even more, because we've made sure the only decisions you're making are the ones that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that. You just have to keep the player experience front and center, right? And we want the player experience to be players making interesting choices as much as possible, as consistently as possible, and then seeing reactions to that. And so what you have to do is, I think, keep that focus at all times, check your decisions against it, and be ruthless about editing out anything which doesn't further your goals and make that user experience better, right? Anything that you are developing just because it's something you like as a developer, or that somehow was a holdover from previous versions or something that does not contribute to the player experience, is basically a tax against your development effort that makes it harder for you to really polish the things that do matter. And so I think just consistently checking what your design is and what your game is forming up to be, and then kind of paring back and trimming out anything which doesn't help support your core goals is really essential.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel like the key word there is making sure everything's meaningful, right? Whether that be everything in the development process or the actions that the players are taking, like making sure that you're very deliberate, which is fantastic. And so this entire thing has been about process, and I'd love if we could end it on actually. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and kind of talking us through this process, because I think developers are going to be able to take some really good stuff away from this as far as game design and of course game development. So again, thank you so much for joining us and practicing social distancing with us. It's been fantastic.